Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Ben Kinsley is joining me this evening. He's co-host, co-producer, and sponsor. Ben, you want to give a 2-minute, I did that once before. You had it down. 1 minute, discuss.
It gets shorter each time.
The whole show.
Yeah, my name is Ben Kinsley. I have a consulting firm called Imperium Advisors. I do a lot of, I really started out as a policy research and development organization and quickly realized that it's not enough to have a good idea. You also have to be able to sell it. So from that spawned a whole bunch of different services that we offer, legislative research, government relations, strategic communications, social media, all kinds of different stuff. So if you have a business in Vermont and you're trying to, or a nonprofit, and you're trying to find your audience with the right message, look us up, imperiumvt.com.
Our guests tonight, we have two, Shayne Spence, who's a House candidate, and Rebecca Fliede, who is a student and editor-in-chief of a newspaper called Basement Medicine.
That's right.
And that I was checking it out. It sounds very interesting. You're gonna have to talk about that. It's at the Northern Vermont University, Johnson, and she's also, which is gonna put us to shame tonight, she has a live stream talk show with a co-host at Linden for the students. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, this is great. So we're talking tonight about something called Thrive, VSC Thrive, and both Shayne and Rebecca are going to talk about the efforts going on to really take a look at our college system and to see how we can fund it, how we can make it successful. And because I think we all heard the Chancellor Jeb Spaulding's recommendation, which certainly created a lot of interest, to say the least. But anyway, a lot of people have gotten together to see what we can do to save our colleges and to make them very successful. So Shayne, do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, and we'll go on from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm 26 years old. I'm not an alumni. I haven't graduated from Northern Vermont University, but I went to Johnson State College and have taken some classes at Northern Vermont University over the years since. So it is something that's very important to me. I've got a lot of friends that are still engaged at the college system. I met my partner who moved here from Chicago because she came to Northern Vermont University. So there are a lot of reasons for me to be, personally invested in this college. But as you mentioned, I'm also running for the House in one of the districts that represents the college. So it's kind of a no-brainer that this is something that, I would be strongly in support of. But tonight we're here really to talk about VSCS Thrive, which is this group that, it started out as a Facebook group out of the immense backlash that came after Chancellor Jeb Spaulding proposed the closure of not just Johnson, but Linden's campus and the Randolph campus of VTC. 3 rural Vermont campuses that I think are pretty much the definition of what makes a Vermont State College. It's the experience of being able to have this liberal arts education, but also being in the middle of the woods, with mountains nearby that you can go and ski at and take part in the local community. There's local businesses nearby that are always happy to create internship programs. Rebecca can talk about that a little bit. She just barely got back from her internship. There's so much that rural Vermont has to offer, but so much of it is dependent on these state colleges that over the years have just been woefully ignored. And, it's something that as long as I've been involved in politics, I've been kind of I've gone down to the State House every single year for one of the, they do the rallies to call for higher education funding. It's always just seemed so backwards to me that we're seen as this progressive state, but when it comes to higher education funding, when it comes to finishing the job on education, which, we fund at a higher level than pretty much any other state in the union. We just give up once people reach college. So, VSCS Thrive kind of came out of this huge backlash to Jeb Spaulding's proposal. And what I really think we're going to be able to do going forward is be the voice at the table for the state college system, for, you know, the students, for the faculty, and for the communities that depend on these state colleges that just hasn't been there in the past.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I love Johnson. Of course, I'm sure you know Professor Doyle.
Oh,
Bill
yes.
Doyle. For about 10, 15 years, he'd asked me to come up with, amongst others, to teach his class. And so I always got a big kick out of going up there. And in Linden, I know Tim Lewis. Do you know Tim? He's in
I
the
don't think I've had the pleasure of meeting Tim.
Oh, well, I was figuring you would because of what you do up there. Tim's got I think he teaches photography and filming and editing, and he's a good friend too. But anyway,
Maybe your co-host, Rebecca, maybe Maxwell.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably Max.
Yeah,
Has met him.
he was a former reporter and got a sense of humor. Oof. But anyway, Rebecca, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so following Shayne, I am 21. I'm actually not a Vermont native. I know.
I'm not either. It's all right.
I live, or my parents live, I live in an apartment in Johnson right now, but I pay out-of-state tuition because I come from New Hampshire. And unfortunately, New Hampshire's also no good at funding their higher education. Vermont ties with them in several regards. So, you know, higher education is near and dear to my heart. I didn't think I was going to college, and then I came up to Johnson and I thought, you know what, I can do this. This place is going to support me, and this place is going to give me what I need to be successful in college, the support systems and the just care that I didn't have in high school. And so, you know, I just found myself falling in love with Johnson, started on one path and ended up now here 3 years later as a journalism major and the editor-in-chief of our totally student-run newspaper, Basement Medicine, which pivoted to fully online last semester, since we're normally a print magazine, but you can't do print when you can't meet in person. So, and then, you know, as a student journalist, I was covering in about the 3-day span from announcement to the reversal and they decide they weren't going to vote. I wrote 8 or 9 articles. So I had like 20-hour days just writing and watching and writing. And then, you know, someone said, oh, well, you know, you're a pretty eloquent speaker. You could join these groups. And I started sitting in on meetings, and then, you know, the rest is history. And working with these people, we found that we can make progress in a way that, you know, we aren't necessarily allowed to have. You know, we don't necessarily work, you know, we don't sit in on administrative meetings. We're doing a lot of work to make things public and make people aware of, you know, what's going on and the decisions being made. And Thrive is really dedicated to the people who need the state colleges the most, Vermonters, and people that, you know, want to get a higher education. They want to get it affordably, and they want to get it close to home. And man, this place is wonderful.
It's great. I'm very excited to hear you be so excited. It's really great. Good for you. It's a beautiful campus.
Oh, absolutely
It really
wonderful.
It's beautiful.
Oh, and Rebecca's an example of exactly what we need to save this system right now. It's people from out of state who pay that higher rate of tuition and, you know, subsidize the system for the rest of us. You know, thank you, Rebecca, for being here.
Yeah, stay, Becca. Stay.
Yeah, we go find 10 more people like you.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I just have reminded me, do you have a lot of international students? Because I just read an article that since we're sort of closed to those folks coming over, they may not be able to come back to school.
We actually, I believe, we had a good amount of international students. A student from Ireland, I want to say, was here this semester and had to head home. Unfortunately, really great guy. I've seen more recently, so I think we're doing a better job in admissions of attracting.
I just think this with the COVID-19, they're not going to be able to get in the country quite so easily anymore.
Right.
Well, and there's actually there's Fliede too. So there's a young woman from I can't remember the country she's from, but it's an African nation,
Nice.
and she's a rock star. I mean,
Yeah.
she posted this video during the proposed closure kind of debacle, and it got hundreds of shares.
That's great.
Really, really heartfelt thing. But she came here from Africa to get an education at Northern Vermont University.
And
and
can I just say, yeah, this woman is a star. Like, she walks into the cafeteria and the room just lights up. I mean,
really?
She's one of the most beautiful parts of Johnson. She just radiates positivity.
Oh, how exciting.
She is an incredible hugger.
Oh, I love huggers. I love them. It's hard in this COVID-19 stuff.
Yeah.
And
well, and that is really, I think, what devastated me the most about going online was missing the physical presence of people. Just being in class with somebody, you cannot replicate that online, and it's really unfortunate. If we have to go online in the fall, because NVU has announced that they will be resuming in-person classes, but of course, if we have to go back online, it's going to be really sad because this is our family, right? These are the people that we spend our days and our nights with, and
I think they're going to offer, from what I heard, they're going to offer in-class, but if you are afraid to come back, they will offer you at the same time the live stream, so you can still be part of the class, which should be a trick to get done successfully. But anyway.
Yeah, that's what I understand.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment because Shayne said he was running as a House candidate. We're going to be interviewing Shayne as we hope we'll interview all candidates, a half-hour show, I think next week. And so you'll hear more about Shayne and his candidacy. So there you go, Ben. Take it away. I talked enough.
How do I follow that up?
Yeah, right, exactly.
So let's kind of frame this issue a little bit to talk about it. I think everyone watching probably is aware that there was a proposal to close some of the Vermont State College campuses. And Shayne kind of talked about earlier which campuses those are. Let's talk a little bit about the reasons behind that. There's a white paper that Chancellor or former Chancellor Spaulding had authored back in last summer, and it talked about some of the stresses that the state college system's under. Of course, there's funding issues from the state. The state does not put as many resources towards state colleges and UVM as it does towards primary and secondary education. Clearly, there's a gap there. But also, there's an issue with colleges across the board in terms of students continuing education. And we've seen this particularly acutely in the Northeast. We've lost a few private colleges over the last couple of years, and in Vermont, as well as other parts of New England. So there's a demographic challenge here as well of fewer people going to college or fewer students in that pipeline, along with the financial issue. And of course, now we have the coronavirus situation where most of these colleges are predicting a 30% drop in enrollment for next fall, which is particularly scary. And this is not just unique to the state colleges. This UVM is predicting the same thing. The private colleges are predicting that as well. And I think what's potentially a little more unique about the state colleges is they don't have these large trust funds. They don't have large endowments that they can use to gap fill some of that revenue. So I'll stop there and just maybe we can talk about what those challenges are and how we can move forward.
Yeah, there's one specifically I'd like to speak to. You'll see a lot of people say, oh, well, if you look at the demographic trends, there's this huge dip in, I believe, 2026. And you look at, the amount of young people graduating from Vermont high schools, and you think, well, it doesn't make so much sense right now, or that historically, because more we have an issue with Vermont young people not going to college, and it is statistically more likely that these students are just looking at the cost of higher education and thinking, you know what, I can't do that, rather than that the demographic, the whole tide of young people is getting smaller. Because if you look at, I believe it's last fall, NVU's enrollment numbers spiked. They got way more out of state students. Admissions was doing a great job. And I'm really proud of the work they did. I was working for them at the time, and it was a really great time to work with admissions because the team was just really motivated, and we brought in a lot of students. And so for people to say, oh well, it just has to do with the amount of young people in Vermont, well, a lot of studies, I believe there's one by Greg Petrix, who is a math and statistics professor at NVU, that says it's really more about high tuition. And so if we can reframe it less as a demand problem and more as a high tuition problem, then we can take the burden of the financial burden of college off of young people's backs, not just Vermont-based young people, but young people across the board, and get them into 2-year, 4-year programs and get them to where they want to be in their lives.
That's great. I know when I worked for Governor Douglas, he was always talking about bending the curve because we spend so much money from K to 12 that he said if we push that down and actually found ways to save money in the grammar schools, then you could take that money and put it to the higher ed where it really belongs. And I always thought that that had a lot of appeal to it, but we didn't get very far with the legislature.
Governor Scott's Cradle to Career program has similar echoes of that. I think, Rebecca, you're right that there is a cost issue here. Vermont has one of the most expensive state college systems in the country. And it's not a coincidence that the lowest cost state college system, lowest cost part of the state college system is doing the best. CCV is the strongest college in the Vermont State College system. It's also the lowest cost.
Wait, so I'm sorry, Ben. So you said that we are one of the most expensive state college systems in the what numbers are that? So some of the numbers that we've looked at, and when you look at per capita, so the amount that we put in per student, which is a number that we often cite when we're talking about our K-12 system, is the amount per pupil that we're spending. We are, depending on which number you're looking at, we are either second to last or last in the nation for how much we are putting into our higher education per student. Right. So I don't know what numbers that you're looking at that are saying that we have one of the most expensive. It might be that because of the scale of our system or something that it is higher cost or something. But from the numbers that we've seen of per pupil cost,
well, that's different than tuition.
We are no, okay, if that's what you're looking at.
We're looking at tuition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Shayne, I think confused. When you look at the phrase Vermont is ranked most expensive in the nation, you have to realize that they're actually saying students in Vermont public colleges shoulder the most amount of the budget. Right. They shoulder the most amount of the debt, 83%. That is nuts.
That's crazy. And I'm 100% in agreement. And that's
and I would agree with the fact, so you're right, from a cost perspective, Vermont is not out of line in terms of what we spend per student in higher education. It's what students are paying is much different because the state's contribution is so much lower than most other states. And if you look at state contribution per student, you're right, it's in the lowest 1 or 2, 3 in the country. And part of that threshold of getting over those higher tuition costs because there's less state contribution is, to Rebecca's point, I think part of why we see fewer students continuing to college or going somewhere else, right? Because if it costs me the same to go to, or even just a little bit more to go to SUNY than it does to go to one of Vermont's state colleges, well, that levels the playing field a little bit. And you may choose a pharmaceutical program at SUNY as opposed to doing something at Vermont Tech. So I think that's a good point. And the other thing that's worth mentioning here is Vermont does pretty well on most of our secondary education metrics. The one that the Agency of Education over and over for the last decade has said we need to work on is the continuing college rate. We have a surprisingly low rate of high school students graduating that continue on to post-secondary education. And that's absolutely an area that we need to work on.
For sure.
Yeah, well, like I said, we spend, what is it, $18,000 per pupil at the K through 12 level,
Right.
and then we drop off to it's something like $3,500 per pupil in the
Pretty
higher
sad.
education realm, and we wonder why we have one of the lowest matriculation rates in the country.
And
Well,
to
and
attract
that-
business, to attract businesses, you need well-educated young people to attract businesses here. So that's
Well,
sad. I'm sorry, Rebecca.
not only that, but think about, Vermont's big push lately is to get young people to come to the state. And one of the ways to keep young people here is to educate them in state, right? I really love Vermont. I've fallen in love with Vermont. I would love to stay, but between the fact that it, is expensive to stay here, that may not be an option for me. And it may not be an option, for other students who are even worse off than I am. I'm
Right.
an incredibly privileged person and very lucky to be there. But so, I could stay in Vermont, but not all my friends have that option. And if they can go to New York and get a cheaper education and then stay in New York, maybe where it's cheaper, then they're going to do that.
Right.
And by the
for
way,
better or for worse.
The SUNY system, and I guess this is only for in-state students, but the SUNY system is free for in-state students.
Right.
So, this is something that when you look at the closure, you mentioned some of the private colleges that closed in Southern Vermont in the last couple of years. A lot of those are directly because they were now competing with the SUNY colleges in a way that they weren't before. Now, they're low-income students who they otherwise would have been depending on getting some amount of income from. Now those people are going to SUNY for a free education, and all that money dries up. So it's
can't blame them for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
SUNY's
so-
a great system.
Yeah, well, I actually have recommended that so many times for us because it's State University at whatever, and then they specialize in something. And I always thought if kids come here because they love Vermont, why not say, state school at Johnson or state, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just like the SUNY system, and they all work back and forth together. And every time I've mentioned that, it's just gone down the tubes. There you go.
It makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Well,
Thank you for that. Thank you.
That's a good point, because that's part of what we're talking about too. And it's none of this is happening in a vacuum. There is a certain level of competition between schools for specific majors, and some of these schools that we're talking about do have programs that are specific to them. Like Johnson has a great forestry program, right? Linden has a great performing arts program and a meteorology program. Vermont Tech Randolph campus has their agriculture program, and the state forensics lab is there. So there's things that are unique to a lot of these schools, but I don't know that we celebrate those things enough.
We don't.
No.
And I think also potentially we try to cast too broad a net with each of these schools as well. So instead of too many of the schools have tried to do too many things as opposed to focusing on what they're really good at.
And then they compete amongst themselves, which is really
And then they're
bad.
competing with each other. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, yeah, and to speak to that a little bit, being and working pretty closely with branding, if you notice, a lot of branding does not say, come to Vermont and study meteorology. You'll get really close to the weather because there's a lot going on here, or come to Johnson's creative writing program. It's staffed by some absolutely incredible published writers and academics that are, world class. That is not what's advertised. It's very much, we are we are the embodiment of Vermont, but it's not specific. And so I think part of our issue is an advertising one, is a marketing one. And of course that Due North brand, I mean, I'm wearing the Due North shirt.
Right.
Like, I love that branding. I think it's wonderful. And I think it embodies a lot of what Johnson and Linden have to offer. But if we can get more specific, and so we say, you know, we are a state college, we educate Vermonters and people that love Vermont as much as we do. And here are the fantastic programs that we have, because we have so many of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Then we are refocusing and getting more of the students that we really want here.
Ben and I and others that campaigned for Vermont noticed your marketing, and we had some comments to how to fix it, because we didn't think it was dynamite enough. Yeah.
Well, a great example of this is one of the ones that we've been talking about is, so Vermont Tech was rated last year, won an award about being one of the best returns on investments of any college in the country.
Isn't that amazing?
You cannot find that on their website anywhere.
Nope.
It is not on their website. And if I was a branding person working on their website, that would be front and center, the highlight. This is the best ROI you can get anywhere in the country or close to it.
Yeah. Well, and you know, to touch on that, we've been putting together these talking points, and I'll throw it out there. VSCSthrive.org is where you can find all sorts of great information about the state colleges and what we're doing. But we have a talking points page that we've been putting together. And, you know, one of the things that we threw on there is the NVU alone, just Northern Vermont University, contributes, I think it's $113 million to the economy of Northern Vermont every year.
That's just the northern tier. Just
Northern Vermont, just the northern, you know, and it's like one of those things where, again, why isn't that the first thing that we're talking about in this conversation? Why are we only treating it as if, you know, and we can talk about the liberal arts piece. I think it's important that we you know, push back a little bit on that a little bit, but you know, why is it that we're only talking about how, you know, these things are just, we're a black hole of money and we're losing all this money and the enrollments is low, when it's like, these things are a major piece of the economic vitality of rural Vermont, especially the area of rural Vermont that I, you know, choose to live in. Yeah. And, you know, that is not a part of the conversation. One of the most telling things for me was we had Lindsay Curley, the secretary, of ACCD.
That's right.
And we had her on to our local Johnson. We have every Friday night, we have a Zoom call where we have people from, you know, state government, local government come and talk to us about different issues. And she came on, it was kind of just bad timing. She came on the day that this proposal had come out. And I don't even think she had time to read any of it. I don't know, you know, how up to date on it she was. But I asked her, like, in the conversation of planning this proposal, did the chancellor come to you and say, hey, these are major economic development tools?
Yeah, right.
What kind of impact would this have on the commerce and community development of Vermont? And she said, I didn't hear about this until today.
Right.
You know, like, she didn't get an email.
Nobody knew about it.
Nobody.
Right. And so it tells me that there's this closed loop that is taking place when it comes to the board of trustees and the state college system, where they don't have any sort of accountability to the legislature. They essentially can do what they want to do as long as they have a state college system to be, you know, the governance body for. And so they're doing what they want to do. You know, one of our biggest things has been, even with what they're doing right now, they've got, you know, these different different groups coming out of the different colleges saying, you know, here's what we're willing to cut. Here are some of our ideas for the future. But every single bit of it follows the trajectory that former Chancellor Spalding laid out when he said, we're going to cut significantly into the state college system. So one of our biggest points as an organization is to say, stop that trajectory dead in its tracks. Turn it around and look at these schools as something other than just a black hole for money. Look at them as the economic development tools that they are. You know, when we're talking about recovering from coronavirus, it's going to be a lot harder to do if we're exporting our kids to other states And then when our kids are graduating from college, they're staying in those other states and they're starting businesses in those other states rather than doing it here. You know,
I've always told the administration over the years, why don't you look to UVM, look to our schools where the kids are coming, they pick going to school there for a reason. Maybe it's because they love Vermont. And if you can find out what they're interested in doing, maybe you can attract businesses here that they can find jobs. But they never seem to work hard to reach out to folks like Rebecca. I mean, stay here, please. We'll find you something to do.
Yeah. Believe me, I've got my hands full right now.
That's right. Anyway, so Shayne, I think I'm going to ask you, we're talking about Chancellor Spaulding's report recommendations. I don't know about where you're all from in your schools, but we were all surprised listening to that. It was like a bomb came out of, and especially about tech ed in Randolph. I mean, that's just the crown jewel in my mind of tech ed. And to propose that it be closed and you should go to Essex. Is it Essex? Yes, Essex. Williston, thank you. It's buildings, but it's hardly a campus. And I was just, so what happened after that in your schools? When you showed up the next day, what the heck happened? Everybody must have been shocked.
Well, I think, Rebecca can probably provide a better on the ground for this, but luckily I think it was after everything had been closed down due to coronavirus, so there wasn't a on-campus reaction to it.
Yeah,
but I can tell you the reaction in Johnson was
it was nuts.
It was insane.
Absolutely nuts.
I think it was the next day, maybe a couple days after the proposal came out, we had a gathering along Main Street in Johnson where there was, several hundred people out there with signs, people going through town honking for us. We had, people out there with megaphones. It was not quite rising to our current level of protests, but we had,
let's hope not.
Right. For a very kind of spontaneous reaction to what had been proposed. It was loud. It was forceful. I I think the response to it was one-sided. And that's one of the things that has been most kind of empowering, I think, for our organization is knowing that I saw people from across the political spectrum. I saw progressives, Democrats, Republicans, all coming together around this same thing, because every single one of them knows this is an important, vital piece of our rural community. And, it's a no-brainer.
I mean, to the student experience, it was first of all, it was nauseating because I was watching the all Senate caucus, I think, and Rich Westman said, oh yeah, I saw this proposal, and I'm thinking, how did he get it? So I texted the critic, which is the Linden newspaper. So the editor-in-chief, Alex Huff, I texted her and I said, are you seeing this? She's like, yeah, I'm seeing this. And we said, what do we do? Do we say anything? Is this real? And then, an hour later, the VT Digger article comes out and we thought, oh, well, okay then. And so we went from 0 to 100. I got text messages by the hundreds. I think in that weekend, I got more than 2,000 text messages from people because, I'm a knowledgeable person, generally speaking. If something's going on at Johnson, I know about it. And so people said, hey, have you heard about this? And then, responding, I basically created a form text that said, here's what's going on, here's what you need to do, and then joined the VSC Thrive Facebook, or it was called Protest the Vermont State College Closures, I think at that point, Facebook page, and stuff started rolling in, and Alex and I started coordinating, the critic EIC and I started coordinating our efforts to get information out, and it was nuts. It was heartbreaking. I rolled through emotions. I had a panic attack, and then I was jumping for joy when they announced they were going to poll the vote. And it was like 4 full nonstop days of answering messages, writing articles, responding to people's emails. sending emails to legislators, and getting an idea of what really was going on, because the Board of Trustees and the Chancellor's office has historically been this black box, where, you hear, oh, the Chancellor's office, the Board of Trustees has decided to, raise tuition 4% this year. And you're like, oh, great, awesome. But you never actually speak to these people. They're on your campus, once every couple of months for a board meeting that's during the morning class time. So to be totally honest with you, even as a student journalist, I didn't know half of these people's names because they just weren't part of my sphere. When last February, when I came back from a student trip, an academic trip to Cuba, I did a presentation in front of the Board of Trustees, and I didn't recognize most of their faces. I recognized Jeb Spalding because he'd introduced himself once. He'd come to the basement medicine office and said, hi, I'm Jeb Spalding. And I'd formatted enough pictures of him for the newspaper to know what he looks like. But the questions they asked me after my presentation really showed me that these people did not know what goes on our campuses. They have no idea. And some of them are absolutely tuned in, but they just have other things to do. They're not students, they're not faculty members. They have lives outside of the state colleges and outside of being a trustee. And so these people really don't know our campuses. They make these huge decisions for our campuses. and that was really horrifying to realize that these people that had so much power over my home didn't know me, didn't know my professors or, my staff. And
I think I made a comment to Ben. I was watching on live stream the meetings. No one asked a question, right, Ben? I said to him, what? They didn't ask it. I'd be there raising my hand going, what do you mean by this? What do you mean we're going to close VTC? What? Nothing.
Well, and if you watched the meeting where Chancellor Spalding, delivered the proposal,
nothing.
To say that it was not put together well, there was no detail. And I was sitting in this office and I was looking at my computer screen and I was yelling at my computer screen. I was like, where are the numbers for that?
We don't do numbers.
This was such a big part of the issue for us is, people like Rebecca were being closed out of the process. Someone who is literally like, not only is she paying the salaries of the people who she's emailing and everything, but you would think that if they're okay with the basement medicine existing, with the student-run newspaper existing, they're at least going to go through the motions of replying to the emails that Rebecca sends. But there are countless people who just ignored her throughout this. And so those of us who are on the outside, as we have been throughout this entire process, we're just left to think, but as the Board of Trustees are meeting and nobody's asking a question, nobody's saying, hey, we didn't hear about this, but we are all just left to assume they knew about the plan. They were in on the plan.
And they didn't tell anybody.
And they didn't tell anybody.
I'm sure they must have gotten a preset understanding of what was going to be presented, because if that was the first time they heard it, they should have been jumping out of their seats, raising their hands. But
I would have. But the amount of emails that I sent asking, and this is pre-closure, asking, hey, what's the financial impact looking like for the state colleges? What's it looking like for NVU? We had a budget freeze at NVU, spending freeze already at NVU before COVID. And so a fellow journalist tried to get in contact with our financial people and they ignored her. So for months, we've been locked out of conversation as a student media organization, and I'm talking about my advisor and he's like, I don't know what to do. He's emailing them to plead with them, like, please talk to my students. Like, this is for their grade, if nothing else, like, please. And, it was so frustrating because there are plenty of people that would talk to me on the record about how, they felt like we were in a financial crisis, but I never got a financial person from the VSCS or NVU otherwise to give me exact information. even when I said, hey, I know I'm living in my apartment, so I'm not going to get a room and board refund, but other people who, vacated their apartments, when are they going to get their room and board refund?
Right.
And when am I going to get my meals refund? The response was, oh, sometime next week. And then the refund I got did not match what I expected to get. And so now, I'm thinking, okay, well, where did this number come from? Email ignored.
Yeah, great. But then we should get back on track here talking about, but this is a great discussion. Thank you both. But let's talk about Thrive. Ben, you want to jump in with some Thrive questions?
Yeah, so we've got a little more than 10 minutes left. So I'd like to pivot to talking a little bit about where we go from here. So this proposal was introduced in March and then retracted pretty quickly after the reaction that we talked about. There really hasn't been any counter proposal offered at the state level. Different folks at various schools have offered different ideas about how to proceed. Even the Northern Vermont University president didn't offer a plan, but explained the gap, the funding gap the school has to cover for the fall. So how do we proceed from here? Like, what are the ideas you guys are working on? What are the ideas that you're hearing out in the community for, getting these schools back on solid footing again and getting the system back on solid footing?
Yeah, I think, Shayne, can you speak to some of the stuff that Adam has been telling us about funding that we may be receiving or have received?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, we have really kind of a 4-step kind of proposal that we think is the next steps here. First and foremost is stopping the current trajectory. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but what they're working on right now is just going along with what former Chancellor Spalding wanted them to do, which was to cut into the state college system significantly. And it is completely ignoring the fact that these problems are caused by a lack of funding, not by any of the other things that they want to talk about. So first and foremost is we need to stop the current trajectory. Second for us, and I think this is something we also kind of alluded to, is the current makeup of the board is not representative of where these schools are located, what the communities that depend on them. And so, one of the big things that we're calling for is a reapportionment of the board, of creating a new board, if that's what it takes, where there is some regional representation, there is some guarantee that, what we have right now is, I think 6 of the 15 trustees live in Chittenden County. The vast majority of them have some sort of connection to UVM, whether they went there themselves or they work for UVM or, they work for some kind of nonprofit that works for UVM. This is the thing, UVM is a big organization in our state, and so they have a lot of tendrils that go into a lot of different societies. So the conflict of interest in favor of UVM and in favor of Chittenden County is very, very strong, not only in the legislature, but also in the Board of Trustees. So that's the second thing that we think is really, really important. Third thing, and this is one that I think is a little more challenging, but we need there to be better oversight of the state college system, and whether that is oversight of the Board of Trustees or, figuring out some sort of process, we need there to be some sort of understanding. We talked a little bit about the fact that this represents an unfunded liability where we've promised, a state college system funded in whole or in substantial part by state funds.
He's quoting there, by the way, in whole or substantial part. That's from
Vermont statute. That is
really? We'll have to,
I think it's 16 VSA. So it is the specific statute that established the Vermont State College system. Says we're going to fund it in whole or in substantial part with state funding. And there's some debate over what percentage that represents, but to me, in whole or in substantial part is much higher than the 17%, the pathetic 17% that we're currently funding them at.
I mean,
so
You tell a child, I'm going to give you 17% of this brownie, and they're going to fight you. Like,
they're not going to understand what that even means. Right? You know, it's like,
right, but that's a tiny sliver. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, it is.
nobody in their right mind is going to think a substantial part of a budget is 17%.
I think the number 50 has to be in there somewhere. That's
Absolutely.
substantial.
I'm with you there.
Our big, we're saying 35%. We want to see at least doubled funding,
Yeah,
but
right.
so oversight is a big thing, and we think that at least saying, hey, are you living up to the laws that we have set up for you
Right.
to follow? I think that's a good first step. And then, finally, we talked a little bit about the complete lack of transparency there has been throughout this process. There needs to be some sort of understanding that, look, you are a public school. You are, and maybe if we're not giving you more than 17%, maybe we don't classify you as a public school, but I think we need to give them more than that. And I think we need to treat them as a public entity the same way we treat a select board or any other public body.
Right.
And every single one of their meetings needs to be something that we're all in on. Everyone needs to know from the outside what's going on, because it's our money that they're spending. It is our people that they're supposed to be spending it on behalf of. And this current process has completely destroyed any sort of trust, I think, that a lot of us have in the system. So
yeah,
I would agree that the process has destroyed a lot of trust. I think, obviously you guys are surprised by the whiplash of what the board and Chancellor Spalding was doing, but I mean, we were surprised too, and we went back as well and looked at the proposal that he offered, the report that he offered last summer, and there was no discussion in any of those board meeting minutes from August all the way up through March. There was no discussion of this plan. Clearly, the board had seen it. The members of the board had seen it, and then when he offers an actual proposal that is pretty similar to the plan or the report that he presented back in August, there were no questions on it. So clearly there was stuff going on behind the scenes that was not transparent.
Right. Well, and that's even suspect, because I don't know if you remember, but when he delivered the white paper address in late August, early September, somebody asked him, and I'm not exactly sure how this happened, but someone said, well, is the closure of a campus possible? And somehow it was thought by several people, many people at the Linden campus, that Linden would be targeted. Many Linden people felt like, Johnson was going to become the whole of NVU, and they felt very overshadowed. And so there was this public protest at the white paper meeting, where Linden students and faculty and community members were very loud and very outspoken about the possibility, very against the possibility that the Linden campus might be closed. I don't think they ever said, we're thinking about closing the Linden campus, but I think somebody in the audience asked, is the closure of a campus possible? So they had a little tiny microcosm of what could possibly happen when you threaten to close a campus. And just seeing the public reaction to this, that these campuses are beloved by their communities. Yes, they are institutions, and they really are shining jewels of the towns that they're part of. And so that they thought that they could close these campuses and people will just sort of lay down and take it, like that is it shows to me.
Yeah, it shows they didn't do their homework. And I know we don't have much more time, so I'll keep this quick, but the idea that this was a surprise, as much as this plan was a surprise, as much as Jeb Spalding's proposal was a surprise, the concept that the schools were in trouble and that the state college system needed help is not a surprise. It is not something that anybody should be surprised by, because, as much as I think Jeb Spalding did kind of, this is a very crude analogy, but he strapped a bit of a suicide vest to himself and walked into the state college system. I think he's been crying out for help for years. I
Oh,
think
yeah.
the state college chancellors before him had been crying out for help for years.
Yeah.
And the legislature, for one reason or another, decided that the state college system was not worthy of prioritization. That's ultimately, like, yes, we can blame the Board of Trustees. I think we need to rearrange the Board of Trustees, but that's where I think the vast majority of our attention needs to lie. And that's, you know, one of the things that we're going to be focusing on is speaking to legislators and making the case that this Vermont State College system is worth investing in.
I just wanted to ask a really, oh, sorry, Ben. I wanted to ask, I was listening to Ben asked me to listen to House Education when they were talking about funding to the state colleges. And they mentioned, and I'm going to go back and listen to the video again because I missed it. They listed several committees that are working on this. And so I don't know if you're able to reach out to them and maybe find out where everybody is, because I bet if everybody got together and said, here's what we recommend, it would be one powerful voice.
If they'll answer Rebecca's emails.
Yeah.
Oh, very well. Then keep trying, Rebecca, because that's just wrong. We're in this together.
Yeah, we've spoken to them in some Zoom calls, and you know, Max and Shayne and I have had some conversations with House and Senate education people. But this is not. It's progress, but it's new. You know, back in March when NVU held a reception at the State House before COVID, myself and some other students went, and the legislators came in, ate the food, and left. They didn't listen to our testimony, not our testimony, because we were in another room. It wasn't really. And to their credit, they were working on the marijuana bills, so they were deep in other things. But it was really disheartening to see that the legislators couldn't come in for 5 minutes and listen to somebody who just graduated, Adriana Eldred, talk about how the state colleges have made her life for the better and that they should fund them appropriately. And they didn't have the decency to come and watch. And then when myself and Adriana and a couple of other students, you know, grabbed the ear of some of these legislators, they're like, look, there's nothing we can do. And so this progress, to see legislators talking about it, is really, really important and really good progress.
Good.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, like, Chancellor Spalding may have kicked off the crisis, but the real underlying problem lies with the legislature. Like the legislature really created the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they are so out of tune with what's going on. It just scares me to death because they don't have a handle on what's happening out there and how much of a problem education is, from too much spending pre-K to 12 and not enough spending in higher ed. It's just not going to help anybody.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say we've had a lot of that, like Rebecca said, we've had a lot of them that have been willing to speak with us, and we had a great recorded conversation with a few of the Senate and House Education Committee members last week. Right now, some members of our organizing committee are actually speaking to Representative Dave Iacovone, who's on the Appropriations Committee in the House. We had a conversation with Senator Baruth last night. So, we're talking to people. People are listening. Whether or not we're getting through, we're going to have to find out. And
you've got some good legislators in your backyard, do you not, that you could talk to? Because some of them, a couple of them that come to mind, are pretty well known and pretty respected in the State House.
Yeah, they're doing what they can. The one thing that I would say, and we're coming up on the end of the hour here, so I just want to leave people with this. This needs to be an election issue. I know there are a lot of other things going on, a lot of other things that are very worthy of our attention right now, but this is something that if we don't take a real hard look at our state college system and our education system more broadly, this is something that we stand to lose in the future. This is something that is going to be cut to the bone if we don't address it now. So we need to address it. We need to elect people who will address it.
Is there any hope that that some of the coronavirus relief funds could be used to bridge some of the funding gaps, at least for the first year?
The question is whether we are allowed to. there are certain things that, when it comes to, refunding Rebecca for the money that she's spent now that the college has to give back, that's something that is clearly covered under the coronavirus relief funds. But other things, we want to make the case that, the massive drop in enrollment that's going to be coming this fall being directly due to coronavirus could be backfilled by the CRF funds. Again, it's one of those things that we have to get the legislators involved who, they have a lot of things that they want to fund.
Right.
And we have to convince them that it is a priority to fund this in front of some of the other things that they want to. At the end of the day, someone is not going to get all of the money they're asking for this year.
Right.
The state colleges have gotten the short end of the stick for 30 years running. Let's not let us die because we're getting the short end of the stick this year.
Agreed. Right. I think we've run out of time, Ben.
Yes. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. This is a really important topic and one that I'm sure we'll be revisiting. And thank you both for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for having us.
If you want to come back on at any time, if anything happens, just we've got a wide distribution so we can get the word out for you.
Great.
Yeah, we'll take you up on that.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening in. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.